Good evening and welcome to the French Institute. It is my great pleasure tonight to welcome this very special event with Jacques Rancière, a philosopher whose work has profoundly reshaped our understanding of politics and aesthetics. Rancière's intellectual journey began as a student of Louis Althusser at the École Normale Supérieure, and Jacques Rancière then quickly carved out his own distinctive path, particularly in the wake of the transformative May 68 Paris uprisings. His academic career flourished at the Université of Paris 8, where he remained until his retirement as Professor Emeritus in 2000. So over the decades, Jacques Rancière has developed groundbreaking ideas in works such as The Night of Labour, The Ignorant Schoolmaster, and Disagreement, to quote only a few. And Jacques Rancière has invited us to challenge authority, rethink learning, and interrogate the concept of aesthetics. And his exploration of equality, dissensus, and the distribution of the sensible has transcended traditional academic boundaries, sparkling vital dialogue about democracy and justice, not only in France, but worldwide, and with a particular following here in the UK. So it's very special to have Jacques Rancière with us tonight. And this impact is exemplified in the scholarship of Professor Oliver Davies, who recently joined University College Cork after years of the University of Warwick. And Oliver is joining us tonight as the author of Jacques Rancière, a book which delves very deeply into Rancière's influential ideas, and this is testament to the influence of Jacques Rancière thought across borders, and particularly in the UK. So it's a rare opportunity. We're very proud to have you both here tonight, and merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Jacques Rancière, so your work over the last half century has been very influential across many areas, but perhaps above all, about the way in which we think about the relationship between politics and aesthetics, and in particular their interimplication. And so there is this development in political theory, political thought, called the aesthetic turn in political theory. And you're credited as being one of the leading inspiring figures behind this turn, alongside great antecedents such as Rousseau and Schiller. So I'd like to ask you really how you feel about the fact that your way of looking at politics has become not hegemonic, but fairly well established, whether you feel that earlier misunderstandings of your approach, the fact that they have dissipated is a good thing, and also how you think the way in which people study politics in Anglo-American institutions compares with how politics is studied in France.
Well, I must say, I'm a bit surprised, when I hear that political theory underwent an aesthetic turn, in the last decades, and that I was an inspirator, of this aesthetic turn, because it seems to me that since the very beginning, since ancient times, politics has always been associated with aesthetic matters, because since the very beginning it has been associated with specific configurations of space, of specific divisions of time, from the very beginning, at least of the Western tradition, politics has been associated with words, with narrations, with images, with gesture, music, architecture, monument, and grounded in various affects, glory, honor, or fear, hate, anger, etc. So, already for Plato, the Republic was above all a matter of distribution of places and occupation, Aristotle based it on the difference between logos and phony, and well, I don't want to also, of course, to list all political theoreticians, but well, basically, I think that I did not invent that politics was an aesthetic matter. I just perhaps try to subvert that tradition, of course, in my very modest way, perhaps by going back from the visible practices or emblems of politics to the very mode of their perceptibility and visibility. For instance, while Aristotle stated that politics was linked to the human capacity of speaking, well, I assumed that it was exactly the case, but there was in fact a previous question. The questions that runs as follows: who is considered as a speaking being? And I emphasized the struggle of the invisible to appear in the light, the struggle of those who were deemed mere bowling animals to prove that they were speaking beings. So I don't think that I invented an aesthetic turn in the thinking of politics. I would rather say that I just shifted the aesthetics of politics from its visible stage to the very condition of its visibility. So, in fact, in a way, it is the same kind of shift that I made in politics and in aesthetics, because in aesthetics too, what I try to do is to move back, from the appreciation of artworks and things like that to the very conditions that make us, perceive an object or performance as being art. So I believe that if there was a turn, it was a turn for either those who think that politics is a mere matter of institutions, or those who think that it is only a matter of class interests, strategies, class alliance, etc. So this is my first point, that politics has always been, in fact, an aesthetic matter. It has always, be based on an aesthetic basis. Well, so I think. Well, of course, perhaps also there is the word aesthetics, and for many people, aesthetics means the practice of the fine arts, the contemplation of pure beauty, etc., etc. And so, what I did specifically, perhaps, is to rethink what aesthetics mean in general and what it meant as a historical turn with the destruction of artistic and social hierarchy of the fine arts. So, well, perhaps what's true that there is a kind of tradition, which is not, or perhaps a tradition inside the tradition, because there is the older tradition that I recalled, reaching back to Plato, and perhaps this other tradition which for you reaches back to Rousseau and Schiller, saying that politics not only is based, on aesthetic matters, but also that there is some kind of revolution that is in fact involved in this, and notably, of course, with Schiller, because Schiller writes at the time of the French Revolution. He writes just after the terror, and so he has the idea that the aesthetic equality, that has just been highlighted by Kant, perhaps meant an other kind of equality, and that on that other kind of equality, it was possible to think a kind of revolution that will be not only a matter of laws and institutions and so on, but also a matter of a kind of sensibility that will be really rooted in a new form of life.
Thank you very much. So I was going to ask you, actually, yes, exactly about that moment, the aesthetic revolution. And I think it might be helpful if you could tell us a little bit more about how you approach some of these questions through your particular method of the scene, as you call it, and that you deploy in aesthesis and you deploy in Le Temps du Paysage, the time of the landscape.
Okay, well, I will start with a very formal definition, of the aesthetic revolution, quite formal. I hope I can see a little more, afterwards. Well, the aesthetic revolution is the passage from a regime of identification of art to another regime of identification of art, or we can say the passage shift, for instance, from the regime of the Beaux-Arts, and the Belles Lettres, to a new form of identification of art and also literature. Well, as I said, I tried precisely to think about art, both differently from those who are always, emphasizing, some kind of spectacular events, like, for instance, Manet's Olympia, or Malevich White Square, White Square, or Duchamp, Fontaine, etc. And come back, from the, in fact, from these artistic events to the very mode of visibility, mode of perceptibility that makes them possible, And so. What is at the core? I think there are several aspects, at the core of what I call the aesthetic revolution. But that happened, very brief, very widely speaking, between the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th in Europe. Well, the break with what I call, the representative of the mimetic regime. And my point, against the usual theories of modernity is that, my point is that a representation did not simply mean imitation. So that it is a revolution when you paint, just abstract forms or colors, instead of painting, painting battles or horses or nude women, etc., etc. So I think that, in fact, what representation meant and what the mimetic order meant was the whole legislation of the representation, prescribing what should or should not be represented, and how it should be represented, which subject should be excluded, of the fine art because of their baseness, and which forms, fit this or that subject matter, etc. And it was a formal legislation that was supposed to, of course, to coincide with human nature. But human nature, of course, was it was in only the forms of sensibility of an audience of refined and enlightened persons. Well, so the aesthetic revolution for me, is the rupture of this regime of concordance between the norms of artistic activity and the forms of sensibility of specific audience. But this break was no spectacular, revolution. It was a very slow process. In fact, in telling, I would say three things. First, objective transformations of the mode of visibility of art. Second, new ways of viewing art and seeing it. And third, a range of interpretations of the role of art in relation with other spheres of experience. For instance, on the first side, the opening of the art museums at the end of the 18th century. That tore artworks from their former destinations, as illustration of religious faith, monarchical power, or aristocratic life, for instance, to make them just artworks, offered to the gaze of anyone at all in museums or salons. Well, on the second point, there was the cancellation of the norms of conformity between subject matter and form, and the exclusion and the inclusion of any kind of any prosaic situation or character, into the realm of art. And these two factors, I think, produce also kind of a revolution in the mode of existence existence and perception, of the place of art, in society. And on this basis, there was the third phenomenon, the idea of the Kantian idea of the aesthetic judgment as a specific subjective form that was no more dependent on a hierarchy. And as I recalled it, Schiller made it the principle of a new revolution. A revolution, he said, both in fine art and in the art of living itself. Okay. Well, and to analyze this revolution in detail, I use what I call a method of the scene. So distinct both, from the classical, formal appreciation of art, and second, from the social history of art, going back from artworks to the very social economic conditions. What instead, the method of the scene focuses on the specific forms of visibility and the specific modes of intelligibility that allow specific object to be viewed, as art, and possibly as a revolutionary form of art. So, the method of the scene. The method of the scene. So, in fact, for instance, I use it in the book called Aesthesis. 14 scenes, of the aesthetic regime of art. Well, a scene is not only so. Of course, each scene is constructed around a specific art object or performance, but the scene is not simply description of an artwork. It is a form of dramatization of the new forms of perceptibility and thinkability that make it appear, as something significant, in art. So. And each scene, in fact, is constructed starting from a description or interpretation that was made at that time. For instance, let's just take an example. In Hegel's lessons on aesthetics, I selected a short passage where he praises a genre painting by Murillo, a representation of young beggars, and he compares it with a painting made by Raphael, who at that time was really the paragon of high art. Well, my interest was never in Murillo. I don't want to say, Murillo is a model of art. No, and nor do I want to say, Hegel tells us what art is. No, that's not at all my point. My point is that Hegel's just a short line. So Hegel's this passage in Hegel's Aesthetics, well, Hegel is not a legislator who tells us about perfection of art and not at all, but. Well, he's just a witness. He's just a witness because at this moment there is a whole hierarchy between high painting and genre painting. That is just discarded. And so for me, what's interesting, not at all the Hegel's theory about art and beauty. It's that there is this new mode of visibility of art that renders possible a comparison that was absolutely impossible, in the old regime. And I try to delve a bit deeper, to unfold the whole networks of conditions, creating these new modes of visibility where a genre painting, by a Spanish painter, or Spanish painting was nothing, in the 18th century, So a genre painting by a Spanish painter, is equal or even simply can be compared, with a work of the great artists, And so I had so of course to delve deeper, and for instance, include in the creation of this new mode of visibility. Well, not only you know the opening of the museum at the end of the 18th century, but also even you know the ransacking of French armies. You know, French armies went everywhere. So in Spain, in Italy, in the Netherlands, you know, and so ransacked all works of art. They were brought to Paris. So there was a kind of visibility of painting as such that was created, you know, and painting started being considered, you know, as well the work of a people, you know. So Murillo's painting, it's not only, you know, work of an artist. It's a work of people. So an expression of people's freedom, you know. So this is what I try to do with the method of the scene. And really, perhaps I've been too long, I'm sure. Okay, but what's important also is that this kind of new visibility of art was most of the time the inclusion in art of things that were outside art, or that were so low art, you know, as a genre painting, or not art, or no art at all, or forms of popular art, you know, circus, acrobats, musical shows, you know, and, for instance. But of course, I've spoken too long.
No, not at all. But I'd like to come back to the aesthetic turn, if we can, to the aesthetic turn in the study of politics, and even though you don't want to take credit for it. But thinkers who use your work, I'm thinking of theorists like Arlette Norval, they often feel that they need to supplement your work with the work of other philosophers, Cavell and Wittgenstein, for instance, because they say that, so in your political theory of the 1990s, you don't really attend to the interiority of subjects. So I'm just wondering how you might respond to that. Well, it's not really an allegation, but how you might respond to that. And also, I'm quite struck in reading your book on Chekhov, so your most recent publication, that there is a real attentiveness to the interiority of subjects, and also to what you might call political affect, so despair and disgust and hope, so beyond kind of hatred, which you looked at before. Is it a change? Is it a new direction?
No, I don't think it's a new direction. First, I must really remember that first, I'm not really a political theorist. You know, I would say that I try to think about politics. I made various interventions on political matters from different angles. You know, and with different targets. You know, and first point. The second point is that for me, a subject is not the source of an action. A subject is a result. So, for instance, in disagreement, you know, I try to argue that a political subject is in fact an intervention that changes, you know, the very field, the very perception of politics. So it is not the action of specific subject, but of subject in a way is what operates in the transformation, you know, in the very perceptibility of living together in a way. But I must also remember that my first intervention was about the subject proletarian. The subject proletarian, so in proletarian nice, you know, and precisely I would say in a way, you know, it was a way back to the interiority in a way, you know, because, you know, at that moment people thought that a proletarian, it was a certain kind of worker at a certain moment of industrial development with a certain form of consciousness, etc., etc. And I said no, proletarian, you know, is not defined by a kind of social identity. It is defined precisely as it is defined by, on the contrary, you know, by an attempt to get out of a certain form of identity. So And so for me, the emancipation of the proletarians, as it was dreamed of, in the 19th century, it was not, a kind of promise of the future. It was a movement that had to be operated, here and now, because all those people, that are present in proletarian nights, their problem is to break, here and now with the form of identity, the form of the ways of doing, of perceiving, of feeling, that are linked to their condition, to their subaltern conditions, So this means that workers' emancipation, in certain sense, for me, was first of all a kind of existential revolution, a matter of perceptions and affects, And for instance, the first part of the book, of the Proletarian Night, was devoted to that kind of inner revolution, individuals and groups of individuals that wanted to change society, and for this started changing the ways of being, perceiving, feeling, and speaking, but were attached, to that subaltern condition, So in fact, in a way, it was about interiority. It was about affect. It was about feeling. And it is true that it was not exactly the same. For instance, when I wrote Disagreement, because the Disagreement was about the operation of the political subject, and what I tried. And in a way, it was the same story, because I tried to think about politics, as a consequence of my work on workers' emancipation. But of course, in the Disagreement, for instance, I had in a way to make the same point, meaning that the point about this kind of break with a certain mode of existence, But the difference was that in Proletarian Nights, I dealt with the topic, where from letters exchange between workers, while I try to pinpoint it in Disagreement, from some gaps, in Plato's or Aristotle, political thought. But in a way, I would say it is the same story, And I would say perhaps it's also the same story, with Chekhov. What interests me, what I call the politics of literature, well, is the way in which literature both translates, the changes, the modes of perceptions and form of affect, in which politics takes its roots, and at the same time, literature, in a way, and notably with Chekhov, questions the way political parties, leaders, and thinkers interpret those changes and try to incorporate them, in their strategy. What is striking, for instance, is the importance in Chekhov's story of the issue of the new life, which is, of course, the political issue of the time. It is New Life, Novoyagism. It was the title of the first, socialist newspaper in Russia, and of course after that it became kind of slogan in Stalin's time. But I will not speak about Stalin, of course. But what is interesting is that for revolutionaries, New Life will come afterwards. It will come later. First, we have to construct the basis for this new life, And Chekhov says no, it's not a matter of changing the mode of production, hoping that it will change the life, perhaps in 1 or 2 centuries. No, he reminds us that the first condition for the future life is the way people live now. And so there is always this kind of tension, and the problem for Chekhov, is now people have been trained to servitude. Of course, serfdom has been abolished, but it is always in the mind, it is always in the brain, and always in the very body of people. So his idea is that individuals that have been trained by servitude cannot generate anything but servitude. So they must change their ways of being, feeling, and thinking, etc. And So I think that there is, in fact, a very strong proximity, between Proletarian Nights and the book on Chekhov. In both books are about the basic issue of how to change life. And we've in fact the same emphasis on the fact that it is first a matter of changing one's affects, one's modes of perceptions, and one's modes of affections, And so, this is for me the interest, in the question about interiority, because I don't like much interiority, and specifically, I don't like the way in which this issue of interiority, was tackled in political groups. I think you understand what I mean. But for instance, issues of interiority in an allegedly revolutionary group, is not something really very most valuable. Well, that is what I can say about this matter. But basically, I think I did not change. There was a moment I had to make the demonstration. I would say a little more formal with some reference, in old political philosophy, etc. But basically, it's always an issue about changing life and changing perceptions and affects.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about a lot of the short stories that Chekhov wrote is that the characters don't manage to change their lives. They grind their way through a kind of lost life. And I suppose the time at which Chekhov was writing at the end of the 19th century and the turn of the 20th, it's a time when the memory of the violence of serfdom is still very, very present, isn't it, in Russian culture? I mean, you do use the expression in the book on a few occasions, l'âme serve, the servile soul or serf-like soul, and I'm just wondering how literally we should take that. And I suppose then, so how is Chekhov helpful for you? How is Chekhov helpful in thinking about how people might change their accustomed ways of obeying and also of commanding? And there's a wonderful short story, isn't there, Corporal Wompov, it's translated as in the English, who's in a courtroom, and he's been sentenced for basically trying to tell his neighbours how to behave, and he comes out of the courtroom and he can't help himself but do it again. So I mean, how do you break that cycle?
Well, I think in a way it's a more complicated story, because the story of Corporal Wompov, well, in a way, is a funny version of the scenario. Because he's a simple man. He doesn't understand that now things have changed, and there is a new distribution of powers, Okay, but 13 years later, Chekhov writes the dark version of the story, and the story is called A Man in a Case. And the man in the case, he's not a simple man. He's a distinguished high school teacher in love with old Greek language, etc. But the point is that he's afraid. He's afraid every time people lose something that has not been expressly, allowed by official circulars, And so every time somebody does something new, he says, okay, well, but I hope that nothing comes out of it. Nothing comes out of it. So now he doesn't kick anybody, gives no order. He has internalized the principle, and the point is that, everybody in the town, all his colleagues also have internalized, this principle. Something might come out of it, and that's a danger. So what's interesting, in fact, in Chekhov, is really, the way serfdom has been entirely internalized, and so that servitude is not the effect of ignorance, but the effect of knowledge, in a way, because people know about the situation, and this is what is illustration. If I have no, I have no time. But there is another story, which is the story of that's called word number 6. And it is the story of a doctor. You have a doctor in a mental asylum, Well, so he's a man of science, a man of knowledge, but as a man of knowledge, he has understood something, that the hospital has no materials, so he cannot really cure the patients. Everybody steals, everything in the hospital. So it is the responsibility of the whole society, and if the whole society, is is ill, there is no point, in wanting to cure people. So there is this kind of resignation that is based on science itself, And for me, this is very important for us now, because in a way, I think it looks like this kind of servitude that we experience today, because, nobody commands us, we don't obey anybody, we just go on doing each day, the same thing we were doing the day before, and we know everything about exploitation, domination, etc. Well, and precisely because we know all this, we wonder how we could change it, so we can denounce this state of things, but at the same time, we know that it will not change, unless society change, completely, which is not likely to come soon, and so I think. What Chekhov tells us or shows us in his story, precisely, there is, for a break to happen, in a way, we must in a way, cease to know, decide this in a way, and it was also what I felt, when I was working on emancipation, but emancipation starts when you decide not to play any longer the role, the part of the one who knows, and so I think it's. Of course, it's hard. It seems hard to understand, but basically, I think this is the main point. At a certain time, we must stop, knowing, and start, not understanding anything, and finding everything strange, and so and we, of course, in Chekhov, it comes. Through some kind of flashes. At certain moments, liberty, so freedom appears. So it is far away. It is far away. Okay, but what's interesting, is the way in the way Chekhov deals with time is at the same time freedom is far away, just giving some signs. And the question is whether we answer the sign, meaning we decide to change something, in our life, here and now. So there is this kind of double relation to time in Chekhov's story, but at the same time, a book. At the same time, we cannot anticipate, the future of freedom, but at the same time, we must try every moment to change our way of life.
Thank you. I'd like to move on from Chekhov now. I'd like to talk about the problem of immigration in scare quotes, because for over 30 years you've been analysing with great kind of critical acumen the way in which the so-called problem of immigration has been constructed, and the way in which this is bound up with a kind of rightwards drift in French political life, but not only obviously in France. So I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that today, particularly in light of the snap legislative elections in France this summer, and how you see the present and the future of French politics in the conventional sense of the term.
Well, you know, I'm not a political scientist, you know. So regarding immigration, well, I cannot really deal with the problem of immigration as a kind of global problem, you know. Today, no. As you told, you know, I just tried, you know, to criticize the way in which immigration was constructed as a problem in our society, and specifically in French society and in French political life, you know. Well, the point is that, and also my point was about the way people think that they are really. They are really struggling against, you know, racism, racist ideology, and so on. Well, it happens that more than 25 years now, I remember exactly. 28 years ago, I wrote a very short text, you know, that was called seven rules, you know, for the progress of racist ideas in France. Well, it was just a way of showing people who thought they were at that moment, you know. So the Front National, he was not represented in the political French Assembly. So he was in a way he went out of the political society. But at the same time, you know, there was this kind of anxiety, you know, and people, you know, wanting. Saying, oh, take care, okay. And I try to tell people the way you are taking care, you know, that you know, these ideas may become dominant in France is precisely the way you think you are fighting against those ideas is precisely the good way, you know, for these ideas to become hegemonic in our country. Why? Because first, you know, well, you denounce every day, every provocation, you know, of the Front National, of the far right. Oh, look at this, which means that every day you help. In fact, it's propaganda, you know. So because I told people what the Front National, you know, asks us, you know, is not to share all their ideas. No, they just want us to agree, you know, that their problem is the problem, but it is a real issue, you know, the real political issue, you know. So they want us to care every day about immigration, and we know that immigration, you know, I don't know what it is in this country and other countries, but in France, you know, immigration is a very biased word because it clumps together to very different problems, you know. So, one is a problem of refugees, you know, how to welcome refugees. The second is how to deal with the French population coming from the former colonies, you know, and who are now living in the outskirts of Paris and causing a lot of trouble, you know, for different reasons, drugs or violence, etc., etc. So I would say from the very beginning, you know, asking to solve the immigration problem is asking to solve an impossible problem, you know. But when precisely you ask people to solve an insoluble problem, this means that day after day, you know, you confirm that it is a problem. We cannot solve it, and it's really a shame. It's really a shame. So there is something to do, but something to do more. So of course, no problem. The problem cannot be solved. But well, the kind of fear, of hate, of resentment it creates, and of course, it's always increasing. You know, and at that moment, you know, also all people were asking the government, be it a socialist or right-wing government, you know, to take measures, you know, against the Front National, take measures against them. There were even people who wanted the government, that the Assembly, you know, make new laws to make it impossible, you know, for the Front National, you know, to have deputies, things like that. They have forgotten it, you know, but this is the way they were thinking at the point. So, well, I say what you are doing now is, well, asking right-wing West racist parties, you know, to take measures against far-wing, you know, racist ideas, you know. But which it means what it means, you know, but it will create some kind of let us say state or elite form of racism, you know. But is supposed what a struggle against bad and dirty racism. So there was this kind of effort to call for well, clean elite racism against dirty popular racism. Well, the point I think is my point. I try to say people really. Acting as you act now, it will precisely make all these ideas become predominant and contaminate the whole political life. And I think this is exactly what happened, meaning that the campaigns against a specific, you know, far-right racist party resulted in a contamination of the whole political class and the public opinion, you know, and also we know, there were all well-minded anti-racists. Election after election, you know, there was a problem. What can we do against the Front National, against racism? And of course, better, you know, to choose, you know, the clean racists, you know, against the dirty racists, you know. Okay, so I don't want to comment it anymore, but the point is that now, you know, the clean racists, you know, and dirty racists have become one and the same, you know. Well, and I think this situation will perhaps is about perhaps to risk, you know, remaining the same for a while, because it is always the same, you know, insoluble problem, and an insoluble problem, of course, creating some kind of new progress of fear, of hate, of resentment, you know. This is, I think, what I can do regarding the political situation. And of course, there are objective problems, you know. There are objective problems about how to keep with the afflux of refugees. How are we to cope with problems such as drug traffic, you know, okay, in our towns. But at the same time, you know, if you say this is the immigration problem, you know, and we must solve it, well, we will really continuously, you know, unleash, you know, some kind of the same affects of fear and hate, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'd like to just ask you now about the last essay in your collection, Les 30 Inglorieuses, where you talk about the COVID pandemic. And you suggest in that essay that there is a big gap between the exorbitant promises of the neoliberal state in terms of guaranteeing our security, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, its failure to in any way really prepare to meet the challenges of a fairly predictable type of pandemic. And you distance yourself in that essay from the kind of some of the analyses in terms of biopolitics that have flourished on parts of the left, and in particular. There's one analysis I'd like to ask you about, so that's the one presented in Le Manifeste Conspirationniste, the Conspiracist Manifesto, that was published by Seuil in 2022 and then depublished by Seuil in 2024, which is pretty unusual. And I just wanted to ask you really, I suppose, about the kind of collateral social and political consequences of lockdown measures in France and also elsewhere, and also on the way in which the motif of conspiracy theory and the allegation that someone is a conspiracy theorist seems to be, I don't know, being used as a sort of way of really policing the consensus in a very aggressive way. I mean, I'm thinking of ways, for example, people like the sociologist Laurent Mukiele, the way they were treated in the French press and wider society. I mean, what do you think about this particular moment, this COVID post-pandemic moment that we're in now?
Okay, so this article, in fact, it was a contribution to a discussion with Judith Butler, in Paris, about the effects of the pandemic. So my text, the title of my text was pandemic. I think pandemic and equality or inequality, I don't remember, but it is the same topic anyway, So I stress, of course, how the pandemic affected, equality, meaning the capacity of anyone at all. So because for me, equality is not a matter of sharing, thing into equal or unequal parts. No, equality, it's about the capacity of anyone at all. The capacity of ordinary individuals to think about common affairs and to act in consequence. And it was very clear, that the first effect of the pandemic had been the denial of that capacity, the construction of a kind of extreme situation where people had to perceive their total incapacity, to cope with the situation, and so they had to follow the orders or recommendations, of the few persons that knew what had to be done, namely, of course, the government and the experts, There was a scientific council that was very important at that moment. Okay. Well, many persons view it as a triumph of biopolitics, meaning a kind of big brother, the omnipresence of security power, controlling minds and body. And my point was, even if the situation was extreme, in fact, the political and ideological construction of the situation, in fact, was still homogeneous with all situations exceeding the normal order of things in our states, today, meaning and following the two main categories, that really help constructing any situation now in our countries, meaning first insecurity and second consensus. Insecurity is a category, into which falls any situation of disorder. It may be a financial crisis, it may be a social protest movement. It may be a terrorist attack, a health disaster, climate disaster. All this now, is included in this category of insecurity, meaning that, that the state is protecting you at every moment, against insecurity, which is always just close by, and so, and which means also that, if this category of insecurity, can in fact include any kind of situation, the only way to cope with it, is the logic of consensus. And consensus, I told consensus is not simply is not as as is thought of sometimes. Consensus is just agreement resulting from discussion. No, consensus means there is nothing to discuss, because there is only an analysis of the situation that it is entirely objective. So there is only one thing to do, and that thing, and of course, more and more, this only thing to do is justified by the authority of science. Most of the time, it is the authority of economic science, that says there is a global world, global economy, and we cannot do anything else, But in this case, it was not simply economy, because when economic science says that that factory must be closed, there are factory workers that of course discuss science, but when it is medicine, it becomes very hard to discuss. Okay, so it's clear for me that the pandemic vertiginously accelerated the march of the triad, insecurity, consensus, science, which is for me it's a kind of a structure of a kind of power, you know, that we endure today in our countries. But at the same time, I don't think that the pandemic created that situation. In a way, my point was that the situation was managed in the same way, you know, as all other situations, you know, terrorism, social protests, you know, climate crisis, etc., was managed. Well, this means that I cannot agree with the scenario proposed by the Manifeste Conspirationniste, you know, which states that our governments, you know, decided, I quote, just a quote, you know, from the text. So the governments decided to strike a big blow to restore their lost authority and their declining profit margins. You know, well, I think this argument it is not convincing at all. You know, because it is just a way of coupling two arguments. First, the old police adage, you know, is fake it qui protest, you know, so because it is useful for them, for the government, you know. Well, of course, they created the situation, okay. And the second also is a kind of reasoning, what kind of argument, you know, what is very insistent, you know, I would say in nostalgic leftists, you know. I mean that every time, you know, where there is a progress of authority, there is a progress of authority, of course. Well, it is supposed to prove that the authority is on the verge of its collapse, you know. So in the quotation, you know, restore their lost authority and their declining profit margins, as if really, you know, capital and state were just on the verge, you know, of their collapse, you know, and had to create, you know, the COVID, you know, to restore their profits and authority. Okay, so I think those arguments prove nothing except the fact, you know, that you are the smart guys, you know, who know the truth, you know, the truth behind the story, you know, while of course, you know, all the idiots, you know, are of course are fooled, you know, by the government, the media, etc., etc. So okay, so I really cannot agree with this kind of analysis. Regarding conspiracy theory, well, I don't share the idea that conspiracy theory is a mere invention of our masters, you know, intended to disparage any dissensual opinion. It is true, but it may happen, you know. For instance, there was another notion that is used, you know, every time. That was used, have been used every time, you know, in front of any kind of dissensus. It was populism. All that was unusual was populism. And of course, sometimes, you know, conspiracy theory, the idea of conspiracy theory, you know, as a kind of mere ideology, you know, was used, you know. But you know, but at the same time, you know, I know that there is a real that conspiracy theory really exists, you know, and really exists, you know. Well, as a kind of, I would say, of exacerbation of a form of rationality, but it's supposed to be good, you know, meaning that while you must not cling, you know, to the appearance, you must just look behind, you know, and try to find what is behind this, you know. So and in the Manifeste Conspirationniste, you know, there is the argument that the conspiracy theory was invented in just after the war in France by an article in a journal subsidized by the CIA. But no, the point is that conspiracy theory is an older thing, and not only a theory, but it was also a practice. If you think, you know, of the role of conspiracy theory, of the idea of conspiracy, you know, in in Stalin's Soviet Union. I think it is not something invented by our government. It has a very long story, and in a way, the conspiracies today, they are not conspiracies because they are stupid. No, they are because they think it is a proof that they are smart.
Thanks so much. And so I've got two very short questions, and then we'll throw it open to the floor for a few questions. So that reminds me of your analysis of the end of the first Trump presidency, what you've just said, in an essay, The Fools and the Wise, a great essay. I couldn't not ask you, given what's happened this last week, for your reflections on that.
Well, the point is that, for instance, about Trump's popularity in general, there is always this belief, that people vote for Trump, that people, believe what he says because they are misinformed, they are ignorant, etc., etc. And more generally, there's the idea that if people vote for the far right, if people vote, for strange people, like Trump, it could be because of fake news. They are misinformed. Well, with this always the old theory that people don't act, rightly, because they are ignorant or they are misinformed. But I think really, how can we always sustain this argument? You can. There are today, and especially in the country like the United States, a multitude of forms of information, forms of verification of information, commentary of information, deciphering of information, etc. So no, it's not a matter that people are fooled by what Trump or his like to say. It is basically for me a matter. It is the fact that they like it. But they like it. So when people also when people who think that they are smart say, look at those poor people, they are ignorant. Anybody can really deceive them. No. I think the point, in this case is not about ignorance. It's not a matter of misguided interests. It's a matter of passions. It's a matter of passion. And what people like Trump do is not at all deceiving people with fake news. It is really unleashing passions of fear, of resentment, of hatred, etc. So I try to say, try to think a bit more. You always think that people are ignorant, but perhaps you are ignorant in your own way. When you try to explain everything by the fact that those poor people are ignorant.
Thank you so much. So my last question. So in the Chekhov book, your most recent book, the motif of the one single life that we all live is it's there quietly in the background throughout. And so thinking about your own work over the years, is there anything you wish you had done differently? Is there another life you might have lived?
Well, in fact, I think I never had really time enough, to think of the possibility of another life. The point, and at the same time, what happened to me, so I was a young student in the beginning of the 60s. So at that moment, I was just a student, and I was informed, that by the person, was our guide, so we Althusser, that Marx's Capital, had to be rethought entirely, from scratch. So nobody had understood, so far, and we had to find the deep rationality of Marx theory. Well, I was 23 years old, and so I started rethinking Capital, rethinking Marxism, etc. Okay. Then you know, some years later, you know, there was 68, and the idea that perhaps the Marxist theory had not really understood, you know, everything, you know, about emancipation, workers' movement, etc. So I decided, you know, that I had perhaps to rethink all those matters. So I must say, well, Marx was in Paris in the 1840s, and he wrote his manuscripts. And at the same time, there was the workers' movement in France. Perhaps I have to rethink everything. You know, perhaps there was a mistake. You know, for original mistake. So I had to rethink, you know, all the whole story. And so I spent a lot of time, you know, rethinking what emancipation and social movement, etc., was about. You know, and it took a lot of time, you know. And then there was a time, you know, when after all this, in the 80s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a new interest in democracy. So there was a new evolution of democracy. I thought, well, okay, but that's not the good way, you know. I have to rethink what democracy means. Okay, and then several years after, I was asked by. I was increasingly asked, you know, by curators, you know, and people in the world of art, in the art world, well, to write the text for catalogs of catalogs about art and politics, you know. And I thought, of course, that the whole relation about art and politics has to be rethought. So I spent all my time, you know, trying to rethink, you know, all those big efforts, you know, and so spent all my life trying to catch up with myself in a way, and so I had no much time, you know, to really think what kind of other life, you know, I could have had, but at the same time I think it was an interesting life, you know. But while people who are students now, you know, I think are not lucky as we were in the 60s.
Thank you very much. So never enough time, but we do have a bit of time now for a question or two. There's one over there and one over there.
Thank you. Yes, what you were saying about the triumph of Trump and the unleashing of passions reminded me of the situation that Georges Bataille kind of diagnosed in the mid-30s, that the rise of fascism at that point was successful because of the capturing of the effervescence and emotion, and he was somewhat more skeptical about the possibility of the left to put anything up against that. So it seems that there's the same kind of situation, and yet, second part of the question, something happened in 1968 which was different. So I wonder, what happened? So what do you think about that, and what happened?
Well, I think although, you know, I've not much read Bataille in my life, but at the same time, you know, I agree with the fact that there is a wrong way, you know, thinking about fascism and fascist passion, which is trying to think of it in terms of interest. No, I think that's really we must think about it, you know, in terms of passion, you know, and think. So I agree. I agree on this point. What happened in '68? You know, 60. Well, in '68 there was this kind of, I would say, of clash at the same time. You know, the combination and clash, you know, of two things. You know, there was this kind of new revolutionary passion, you know, among young students, you know, and academics, you know, and at the same time, you know, there was the strength, you know, of the working class, you know, in France, and it was still important, you know, and so I think the point is that there was this kind of clash in '68, you know, between, I would say, the new aspiration, you know, for revolution, and, you know, and I would say the attempt, you know, of the Communist Party and the trade unions. I would say to keep, you know, the strength, you know, of the class, kind of keeping, you know, our working class, you know, in a way, you know. And of course, I think what's interesting, you know, because in '68 people said, oh, the students, they're stupid. They're stupid. They think that really they can really create a revolution now. You know, they don't know about the force, the strength of the working class, the Communist Party, the trade unions, etc., etc. You know, and they are. But well, in a way, you know, 10 or 15 years afterwards, it happened that also the people who wanted to keep, you know, the purity, the pure fortress of the working class. It was also an illusion, precisely because, well, in '68, the students went to the gates of the Renault factory and the trade unions so close the gates, you know. But the point is that 20 years after there were no gates because there was no more any factory and no more any trade union, you know, in this place. So there was this moment of, at the same time, I would say, common aspiration and gap. And the point is that, now we are in a situation where there is no real imagination of a collective force, you know, in fact, against precisely fascism and all these things. And so, we're in a situation when there is no collective force, no idea of collective force. Well, there is the economic power, state power, and individuals. You know, and it is a situation in which I would say there is only one affect that is possible, which is the affect of resentment. Meaning, we don't like what happens, but what can we do? What can we do? You know, and in a way, it also ties up with Chekhov.
Great. I think there was a question back there.
Question about the second row.
So have some general question is like, what material can we use today to think, to emancipate ourselves in daily life? Which I think some 3 or 4 smaller questions. One is, in most of your research and work, like the Ignorant Schoolmaster, the Joseph Jacoto, and the Proletarian Knights, it's all about, I think, some archaeology of literature and self-education, which some education method and workers' own writings 200 years ago. Is there some coincidence on this, like only emancipatory thoughts can be formed and clarified through this historical events happened already, and even a long time ago, something like Hegel would say Minerva's hour after twilight. The second question is that in your recent work on Chekhov, there's something that talk about how to get rid of a servitude, and one of them I think could be an answer would be a kind of will, a kind of volunteer to imagine some new lifestyle, like what's exactly Belikov lacks in the Man in the Case. And the third question is,
can we just maybe just do the two? Can we do the first two and then move on?
Just one more sentence. Is there could be a chance like something called the politics of TikTok, politics of short videos, because I think it is some kind of form, media form, or even art form, quite similar, resemble to the novellas in Chekhov times. That's all.
Well, I cannot really, answer the last question because I don't know much, about the thing you quote. So about TikTok and so on, really, I'm not an expert and I cannot really answer the question. Well, the first point, the first point, is. What perhaps is interesting, both in my work about proletarian nights or about emancipated, about the ignorant schoolmaster, but also about Chekhov, is that all these old stories, in a way, they happen, they happen at a moment when precisely, people are still in a certain way isolated. So there are no big, no big parties, no big unions, no big strategy, of changing the basis of of society for a future life. So Jacques Cousteau tells, equality or inequality. Well, it's not a matter of the future, thinking that no, there is inequality, but we will reduce it. No. Equality and inequality are two antagonists, in fact, forms of structuration of experience, two antagonists, ways of word making, regarding proletarian nights or Chekhov, well, the question is, we cannot. There is no, long-run strategy that can lead us, from the reign of necessity to the reign of freedom, as Engels says. No, in a way, freedom is far away, and in a way, it gives us sign, and we must change. And we must change now. In the story called My Life, there is this kind of tension between two, I would say two passwords in a way. There is one is everything passes. So okay, and the other is nothing passes. Nothing passes because everything really creates a trace. And everything we do now has an importance. And we don't know what kind of importance, but an importance for our future life, And what I think is fascinating, with Chekhov is precisely this idea, and it was the same thing for workers' emancipation, all this happens, before the existence of big strategies for changing life. With the idea, in a way, we have to change life, try to change life, now, even if we don't know what will be the effect of it, And I think, in a way, we're in the same situation because all those stories happened before, the big attempt at changing the society, but changing the economic basis and so on. And in a way, we are in the situation afterwards, And again, we are in a kind of situation in which we are isolated persons, with no big collective institutions, etc. So perhaps, so it's not only a matter, of telling the truth afterwards, as in Hegel. It's a matter, a certain, I would say, similarity of forms of experience.
Do we have time for one more? Yes. Yeah, one more question or comment here, I think. Yeah.
Hopefully a quick one. So, in terms of politics and aesthetics, what do you think your theories about politics and aesthetics can help us to understand the Israeli-Gaza conflict?
No, I never pretended, that what I call, what I wrote on the politics of aesthetics, could help us, really answer the situation in Gaza, you know. Well, well, I don't know exactly what is behind your question. You know, of course, perhaps you can. Of course, it is clear. You know, it is clear. But trying to think about some kind of political experience and some connections between aesthetic promise and political promise. It could be important to think about our ways of behaving today, you know. But I never pretended that it could solve the Palestinian problems, because well, in a way, it is true that we, I mean, just individuals like me, you know, feel that they are, well, totally important, because all that we can say, all we can propose is entirely interpreted. You know, for instance, well, in France now, you know, in France now, well, just if anybody tells that the situation of the inhabitants in Gaza is really unbearable, you know, and unacceptable, is considered an anti-Semite, you know. It's automatic, you know. It is the way, you know, the intellectual world really, you know, works in France today. Perhaps it's not the same here, you know. But really there is a kind of censorship, you know. It's not only, you know, many protests about the situation in Palestine, you know. I've been forbidden by the government, but for instance, in the intellectual world, there is a kind of ban, a kind of censorship, you know. So it's true that what I wrote cannot really help us, you know, acting, you know, doing something, well, about the Palestinian problem. But I don't know, you know, which theory today, you know, can help us, you know, in this situation.
Thank you very much, Jacques Rancière, and thank you all for coming along.
Thank you.